You should never play hide and seek. A mom decided to play hide and seek with her 2 kids. The mom began counting, ready or not, here I come. She begins searching the downstairs kitchen because she knows that they hide there every single time. As she's walking to the kitchen, she starts saying, I wonder where they are. She looks under the table and sees they aren't there, which is kind of odd. She knew they were too scared to go into the basement alone, but she decided to check anyway. They weren't there either. She began to panic. The mom then says, Jordan, Casey, come out now, mommy's not playing anymore. There was no answer. Panic really begins to set in. She decides to call 911 and reaches an operator. She tells the operator what's wrong and the operator sends an officer to her house. Once the officer arrives, he says, don't worry, we will find them. As she's sitting in the living room, she hears giggling and laughing and hears a closet door slam upstairs. She sprints upstairs and says, Jordan, Casey, you worried me sick. She opened the closet door and nobody was there. While all of this is going on, she hears the doorbell ring. She runs downstairs and finds the officer holding Jordan and Casey. The officer says, they were hiding in the shed out back. Then Jordan looks at mommy and says, why were you telling us to stay in the shed? The scary true story about why you should never ever talk to a girl that has a boyfriend. One day a guy was sitting in class when a girl named Tracy DM'd him. Her account was on private, but based on her profile picture, the guy thought she was really attractive. So the guy requested to follow her and shot her a DM and said, hey, you should accept my request. The girl replied, you're very attractive, but I cannot accept your request because I don't want my boyfriend finding out. All girls are the same, man. The guy thought it was very flattering of her to compliment him while she had a boyfriend, even though it was wrong. So while a lot of the small talk is going on, he finally ends up asking her if she wants to hang out at the beach at 11 a.m. She replies and says, yes, but I'm nervous. He says, don't be, we're just gonna hang out, and he pulls into this parking lot. Keep in mind, that's very important. He DMs her 5 minutes later and says, hey, I just got here, where are you at? She replies and says, great, I left something in the sand for you. So him kind of questioning it, he finds in the sand there's a Polaroid picture of his car that he just parked. I'm running out of time, but I'm posting part 2 right now, so go check it out.
Make it to the end, I'm sorry. In 2007, a woman was lying awake in her hotel bed when she started hearing a kid run up and down the hall laughing and making tons of noise. She considered going out and telling the kid to be quiet, but eventually just said whatever and fell asleep. The next morning, she got up and asked her teenage daughter who was staying in the room next door if she had heard the kid, and she said yes, it was so annoying. That night, the woman is back in bed trying to sleep when once again she hears the kid in the hall. Now feeling pretty annoyed herself, she starts walking to the front door to get a better listen when the footsteps stop right in front of her door and she hears the kid playing with the do not disturb sign. She leans into the peephole to get a better look, but the kid's gone. So she steps into the hallway and looks down the hall, and there's the kid at the far end, just standing there perfectly still. The picture at the end is real. In 1876, a woman from a very prominent family in Paris goes missing. After years go by and no one has a clue what happened to this woman, friends and family ultimately mourn her death and move on. 25 years later, and this anonymous letter shows up on the Attorney General's desk, claiming that the missing woman's family had a secret. Intrigued by the letter, the police go to the family's home, show it to them, and ask to search the property, to which they say, go for it. They search, they don't find anything, but on the way out, they notice something very peculiar. At the end of some stairs was a door that was padlocked shut. When the family refused to open it, the police break it down and make a horrifying discovery. Cowering on a rotten straw mattress in a pitch black room was the missing woman, now 50 years old and extremely malnourished. Her mother had imprisoned her there after they had fought over her boyfriend, and she had not seen sunlight or another human being in 25 years.
A series of doing my makeup over my own scary childhood stories. Up until I was about 16, I didn't know how to put a barrier up on my own energetic fields, so I used to see a lot of stuff and experience a lot of different dimensions. The first story starts when I was 2. I don't remember it much, but my parents have told me this multiple times. We lived in this little white house. It was very old. My parents used to always hear me laughing and playing in my room with someone, but there was no one in my room. When they asked who I was talking to, I told them it was a little boy named Omar. They thought it was just an imaginary friend, but now that I think back on it, when I was 3 and 4, I did see someone. He was always very kind to me. I would play Barbies and he would play with me. He would draw me pictures. I would leave my books out for him so he could read while I was at preschool. I would tell him about my days and he would tell me about his. But things started to get really weird once my brother was born, and that is when my parents started to see him too. They believe that this is because he wanted to be the only little boy in the house. Stay tuned for part 2.
Must have been out of her head.
Believe it or not, this is a well-documented true story. In 1947, an American ship picked up a horrifying distress signal coming from an unidentified vessel. The first transmission was all officers, including the captain, are dead. The next transmission was the whole crew is dead. The last transmission was I die, and then silence. The Americans trace the signal back to a ship that's drifting off in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They quickly assemble a rescue team who boards the ship. They find the entire crew has perished in the exact same position. They are on their backs with their hands up as if fighting with some unseen force, and they look like this. There was no physical damage to the bodies or to the ship itself. However, even though it was 100 degrees outside, it was 40 degrees on the ship, and the bodies were rapidly decomposing. As soon as they tie up the ship to tow it in, it explodes, and then it sinks. To this day, no one knows what happened inside of that ship. Some say it was a chemical leak, others aren't so sure.
Why you should never fall asleep in class. So in 2014, a little boy named James was just in high school, and after coming back from the bathroom, he was really tired, so he fell asleep in class. So this class was full of pranksters, and while he was sleeping in class, they decided to put him in a coffin and bury him alive. So while he was deep in sleep, they picked him up, put him in a coffin, and put him underground. Then they started shoveling dirt over his coffin. They were gonna let him out in 30 minutes, but their whole class forgot. Then 3 years later, he literally dug himself out of the coffin, and he survived from eating dirt and bugs.
You should always lock your doors. A class was playing a game of Kahoot when they heard a voice on the intercom say, "This is not a drill, go into lockdown." The students huddled in the back of the classroom, and then the power went off. Minutes later, the students heard the sound of a man screaming at the top of his lungs, running down the hallway. The lunatic man started banging on the lockers, and his screams gradually got louder. He then started banging on the classroom window, yelling, "Open up." He eventually left, and 10 minutes later, a voice on the intercom said, a mentally ill person had entered the school and attacked the lady at the front desk. The staff did a sweep of the school and still couldn't find him. So they locked the doors and resumed class. Later that night, one of the janitors went into the utility closet when this happened.
You should never buy an Alexa. In 2012, a little boy named Johnny was just chilling at home. He just came back from school, so he decided to chill on his bed. He started to scroll through Instagram, but he heard something from his closet. Johnny does have an Alexa, and when he said, "Alexa, turn off the light," she didn't turn off the light. So he knew something was off. He opened his walk-in closet to see what was going on. Then he heard the Alexa talking to herself. Alexa was apparently giving Amazon their address and personal information. 3 days later, the family was found dead.
Story about the blind woman who could see ghosts. So this girl who was blind at birth lived with her father on a single ranch house. So because she was blind at birth, she had spatial awareness. Pretty much she knew how far apart everything was based on what she touched. One day in the living room, the blind woman was talking to a ghost named Ellie. So Ellie said to the blind woman her name and asked her why her face was so messed up. So the blind woman then asked, "Why is my face messed up? What's wrong with it?" And at that point, the father then heard the conversation and snagged the blind woman out of the room and said, "Who were you talking to?" The blind woman then replied, "I was speaking to Ellie," and then the father laughed. Over the course of the next few months, the blind woman started speaking to over 13 ghosts. And each time she would speak, her father would get very, very upset at her for speaking to ghosts. So one day, the blind woman fell in the kitchen and had to call the paramedics. And once the paramedics arrived there, she asked, "Can my dad come with me to the hospital?" The paramedic then replied, "Your dad's been dead for 6 years." Make sure to like for a part 2.
This is why you should always sleep with your lights on. In 1991, a man named Christopher Case was found dead in his bathtub, fully clothed in the fetal position. When police interviewed his best friend Sammy, she told them about a very disturbing phone call she got from him the night before he died. On the call, he told her that the previous night he had woken up to what sounded like whispering coming from underneath his bed. When he went to look, he couldn't move. As he laid helplessly, he watched a black figure pull itself out from underneath his bed. Once it was fully upright, it reached down and began choking him until he passed out. The next morning when he came to, he felt his neck and it was swollen and bruised. And then he saw blood on his hands and he saw that there were deep, uniform incisions on each of his fingertips. As he's saying all this to Sammy and telling her how scared he is to go to bed that night, he suddenly stops and he says, "I hear whispering outside my room." Then the phone went dead.
You should never wear your necklace in public. So in 2019, a little girl named Sally was walking around with a $25,000 necklace around her neck. At the time, she was considered as royalty. This was a VVS diamond chain, and she was just wearing it in public. And this chain could not be broken or taken off, so she would sleep and shower with it. And when she was at the mall, there was a bunch of robbers that were looting the stores. She was so scared. Robber came up to her and asked her for her necklace, but she said no. So the robber tried taking it off her neck, and it wouldn't come off. So he called over his boys, and they eventually ripped the necklace off of her neck. They took her whole head off just to get this chain.
Why you should always check under your bed for monsters. In 2012, a young woman who was on the phone with her boyfriend walks downstairs to the lobby of her apartment building, collects her mail, and then heads back up to her room. She sits on her bed to start sifting through the mail when she drops her phone and it falls under the bed. She lies down on the ground to try to reach her arm out to grab her phone when she notices something horrible underneath her bed. A man is lying underneath her bed with his back to her. He's in the fetal position. She manages not to scream. She grabs her phone and says to her boyfriend, "Hey, I gotta go shower. I'll call you back." And she quickly runs into the bathroom, locks the door, turns on the shower, and then jumps out her first floor window. Once she's safely across the street, she calls the police, who quickly arrive, and they go inside and they come out with a deranged, skinny-looking man. Before they take him away, one of the officers walks over to her with a very grim look on his face. He looks at her and he just says, "We found him standing outside of your bathroom holding a knife. He was waiting for you."
Warning, this video contains stalking and graphic violence. It had been 8 months and I hadn't heard anything. I was living my best life and I had a boyfriend, my very first. I went over to his house to meet his parents, and on that night I got a text message that said if I didn't leave, things would get bad, with the signature "always watching." They had a cat that they let roam around outside. Later in the afternoon, it was time for my boyfriend's mom to take me home. As we were leaving, when we opened the door, his cat was on the front porch, gutted, with a note that said "always watching" written in something red and sticky. Immediately we called the police. A report was made, my phone was finally taken into evidence, and the note was taken into evidence. They obviously let us keep the cat to bury it, and nothing was done. A few months later, I got my phone back, and they said that the numbers were fake and somebody was using a computer to change their location, and that there was nothing that they could do. In part 4, things will be very graphic and very violent, so I might take a while to do it, so please be patient with me.
This is the craziest shit I've seen so far. I was taking the trash out with my son, and he kept pointing at the mirror and waving, and I didn't know why. So I pulled the camera out, and I can't believe I caught this.
That's Rowan.
Why you should never lick envelopes unless you want, well, you'll see. A woman in California who worked at the postal office dealt with tons of envelopes. Now, normally she used a wet sponge to wet them, but she ran out of the water, so she decided to lick a couple envelopes to get them closed. In the process of licking it, she ended up cutting her tongue. She didn't think anything of it until about a week later when she noticed a huge lump forming on the side of her tongue. The doctor took a look at it and said, "We need to do surgery and get this thing out of here." The doctor started to incise the lesion out, but then he noticed something crazy. Out from the hole came a live cockroach. It turns out that the envelope had cockroach eggs on it, and when she cut her tongue, the eggs went into her tongue and started forming into live cockroaches. I don't know about you, but I'm never licking envelopes again.